Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out a pair from a US-based microbrand, specifically Pennsylvania. This is from Ardío, and this is their Caribe. This one, as of time of publishing, is already live on their website, and I'll of course have a link down the video description. We're going to be checking out a pair of them today, but we'll look at the other colors as well. Before we dive into these, let's take a quick look at the packaging and see how they ship. These watches ship in a somewhat rigid zipper pouch, as you can see here. It is branded on the exterior. As you flap that open, you have the watch itself for presentation. It is just a single watch pouch set in with a kind of hardish foam and then elastic. You do have a flap here to separate it from the top section. And then in the top, you can see it has a warranty card, which this comes standard with a 1-year warranty, just a basic cardboard construction like a business card there. You have the leather strap that it comes with it. You also have the bracelet we'll be checking out throughout. And then there is this silicone tropic strap. And then they additionally do include a tool with it, which this is a pusher on one side and a spring bar tool on the other side. All right, now that we have a better feel for how they ship, let's just go and dive into these. We'll take them one at a time. We'll start with the green one here. As far as the basic specs, the case measured from roughly the 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock position is coming in at 39.8 millimeters. The bezel is pretty much dead on flush, also coming in at 39.8 millimeters. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is a reasonably compact 47.6 millimeters. The thickness. This is total coming in at 12.8 millimeters. However, I'm going to say right off the bat, it wears so much thinner than you'd expect from that. They state a spec of 10.8 millimeters without the crystal, and as you can see, it is a high box edge for that. However, I find it even actually wears thinner than that, and we'll look at why that's the case here because there are reasons behind it. As far as the crystal itself, as we already saw, it is a double dome box edge sapphire crystal, which does feature an inner air coating as well. The movement is beating away with a nice reliable Miyota 9 series, specifically the 9039. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's going to be an automatic. It does have hacking, hand winding, higher beat, 28,800 beats per hour, around a 42-hour power reserve. In this particular one of the claims to fame with this company is they really focus on attention to detail, particularly with the quality control. This is actually regulated, each of these, to be within 10 seconds plus or minus for that. So that is hand regulated directly by the company here in the US. As far as the water resistance, this is coming in at 200 meters or 20 atmospheres. The weight. Size to my 6.5-inch wrist on this bracelet, you're looking at 142.3 grams. So not too bad there at all. Really in the middleweight category, I think it wears a little lighter, partly because of the comfort, and we'll look at why the comfort is there. And then on this leather strap, this one is coming in at 80 grams on the nose, and we'll explore this further. Alright, so now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper and get a better feel for what this one's like to actually live with. First, for the colors. There's of course the two variants we're looking at today, the one they're calling isotope green, as well as the brass version. There's additionally a light blue, an orange, and a gloss black. Each of these are going to have differing finishes. There are 3 of them that are grouped together, so like that light green, you're going to see what they refer to as their proprietary speckled matte finish. That's going to carry over to your light blue as well as your orange version as well. One of the things that we'll see, not only does that exhibit really nice color and light color shift and light play, but on top of that, you really do get kind of that iridescence and that speckly effect. It's a little bit of like a gloss metallic effect, despite the fact that this is itself a matte finish. So that's a really neat sheen in effect there. As far as the brass version, this one has a circular brushing going across the dial, and that has excellent light play, as we'll see as we move it around here as well. And then additionally, there is a gloss black version which features gilt accents, and then with that gloss black, that's going to be kind of like an enamel type finish, and we'll check that out next to an enamel dial here shortly. Each of these, no matter which version you go with, you're going to find that it has fantastic vibrancy to it. Whether you're going from pop from the actual color of the dial like we have on the green version, or you're just going from the overall finishing and the light play that you get from that circular brushing or the gloss reflectivity of that black version, they've really each got something to catch your eye, and I find them to be quite stunning, and we'll check out that throughout conditions here. They also have a really clean aesthetic for each of these. So you're going to see, while it does have total 4 lines of text, 2 printed at the 12 o'clock and 2 printed at the 6 o'clock. Overall, it's a pretty expansive dial, and I think that's partly due to the overall aesthetic and effects that they have. They really didn't make it too cluttered for this. It gives plenty of breathing room throughout the dial. As far as the printing, as we already saw, you have the brand name at the 12 o'clock, and then you have the model name down at the 6 o'clock. As you move out to the edge though, you can see this does have precision legibility with a printed chapter ring as well. You're going to have more prominent hashes at your 5-minute increments, and then you have individual hashes in between. That is impacted by the box edge crystal, but we'll check that out further as we go. And speaking of the crystal, this really gets a glorious crystal distortion effect that's not going to be for everyone, and as I already alluded to, it does impact the precision legibility a little bit. However, I personally think it's a really cool effect. It gives a little bit of that vintage kind of vibe on an otherwise very modern and I think a fairly unique type of design here, particularly with the layout of the hardware that we'll check out here next. As far as the hardware itself, the handset is what I would describe as a modified syringe. You can see it is kind of tapered, a little more embellished than you would typically find for a syringe, but then it does have the signature needle tips. One of the things with this that leads to excellent legibility is it is going to be a matte black finish, and I believe that carries over to all variants, certainly the two we're looking at here today. Additionally, for the second hand, you can see it does have a nice lollipop with an arrow tip out there, and then again, just a delicate finish to give you that precision legibility. As far as the markers, they change this up a lot as you move around the dial. At the 12 o'clock position, you have kind of what I would describe as a shield. Then in between those, most of them, instead of being circular, are going to be a teardrop shape, which I think that's a nice little aesthetic nod. And then at the 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock position, you have baton or rectangular type as well. As far as the loom pattern, the loom here is going to be, as you'd expect, applied all the way around as far as the markers as well as all three hands. There is additionally at the 12 o'clock position, the loom pip does have loom applied to that as well. And this with not really being necessarily a dive style watch with its 12-hour bezel, I think that's sufficient here. As far as the loom performance, I found it to be adequate. These are not going to be the strongest loom that I've ever seen on any, but they perform plenty respectably, so I think nothing really to complain about too much there, though there is one footnote for that we'll come back to towards the end. As far as the bezel on this is a 120-click unidirectional bezel, and we'll check out that action here momentarily. As far as the finish, you can see that this has kind of a modified wide coin edge. So that is a little more intricate than the typical coin edge. It's a little more decorative there for that overall aesthetic, and it provides plenty of purchase. That's despite the fact that you'll see that this is where they're principally going to get your polish accent on the watch. So the watch, as we'll check out, is going to be principally brushing. However, the bezel here and carrying over to the edge, they did add that little polish, which gives just a perfect little kiss and complement, and that's a unique incorporation. A lot of times, they'll just carry that over on the case edge. Here, with bringing that into the bezel, I think that's a very cool look. As far as the bezel itself, it is going to be 316L stainless steel, and that's true of the case as well, that we'll check out here momentarily. You're going to see the mix, as we already looked at, a polish on the exterior, and then circular brushing going around the insert. The insert itself is going to be stainless steel as well. And then as you can see, and as we already talked about, this has 12-hour markers, so you can use this as kind of like a GMT light for functionality there. Again, with being a 120-click unidirectional, we'll check out that action here momentarily. As far as the finishing, you can see this is milled down in with your numerals, and that has what appears to be a black enamel finish, with the exception of the 12 o'clock with that pip, as we already saw, that is loomed. As far as the action, let's check that out, because this is something special. Hear that tactile click. This is one of the most satisfying bezel actions that I've ever heard as far as the tactile feel. It is not light, nor is it heavy. It's just really well dialed in, and despite the fact that this has a polished edge to it, I have not had any issues with grabbing a hold of that for traction, and I think that's partly owing to the unique mechanism that this has. I'm not familiar with all of the technical intricacies of this. However, this is not the typical leaf spring that you have in there, and I really think that it shows. You just get a kind of a reverberation that's probably hard to capture on camera, but it just snicks and clicks so nicely into each of those positions there. Really satisfying bezel action. No complaints there. And let's check this out on the other one just for validation. You can see very similar. This one's perhaps a hair lighter than the other one, but they're both pretty well dialed in across the board. And then giving a stop there. And as you can see, no real back play or anything for that. So nothing to complain about there. Great bezel action. As far as the case on this, as I already mentioned, is 316L stainless steel. The finishing is going to be brushing all the way around. So you're going to see that it does have horizontal brushing running the length of the case. It has a nice overall flow to the case. And one of the things that you're going to notice, and this kind of gets back to the overall thinness, this has a very thin mid case to it. Fortunately, it's not at the expense of having a thick case back. And with having a fairly pronounced downturn, you can see that the lugs come just a little bit proud of the case back, and it nests perfectly into the wrist. At least on my wrist, this sucks down in there. You can't even really tell that there is a case back to it, and it just makes it wear so incredibly thin. And then the crystal thickness, you don't really notice at all on the wrist. As a result, I think this wears so much thinner than even the 10.8 would make you expect there. Carrying through to the lugs, as we already saw, this nice delicate flow comes through. You have fairly chunky lugs for this, especially for the case size. You do have traditional curvature and, of course, fitted end links here with this bracelet, which is a newer addition. When they launched this, they didn't have the bracelet available, and this bracelet's pretty excellent that we'll check out here shortly. And then shifting over to the 3 o'clock side, you can see that this does have integrated crown guards for it. They're a fairly simplistic design there, just kind of basic, chunky. I would have perhaps liked a little more of a flow there, but I don't think this looks bad aesthetically either. As far as the crown itself, this is coming in at 5.8 millimeters, which sounds a little bit on the small side, but I have not had any issues with gripping hold of that. It is finished with a coin edge, which is going to be relatively similar, perhaps a little bit tighter, but relatively similar to the bezel. The crown itself, as you'd expect for the diverse styling, is a screw-in construction. Additionally, it is signed on the exterior, as you can see here, and that is nicely milled in. Shifting over to the case back. The case back on this, again, in keeping with the dive-ish styling, is a screw-in construction for it. It does bring in some polishing, and that gives you a nice accent out on the lip, and you can see that a little bit from the profile side, and again, breaks up some of that brushing that you have throughout the rest of it. However, it is going to be brushing on your flat surfaces, so that's a circular brushing, and then you have nice blasting in the middle to really accentuate their logo that they have cleanly milled in there. And then, as we already saw, this is relatively thin, so especially the way that it nests on the wrist doesn't really add to the overall perceived thickness, and I think that's well done. Shifting over to the bracelet. The bracelet, as I mentioned, this is a newer addition to it and it is extremely welcome. This is going to taper from 20 millimeters at the lugs down to 18 millimeters at the clasp, and we'll check out that clasp here shortly. The bracelet itself at the end links, as we already saw, is a fitted solid end link. It does have a female articulation to it, and that's particularly welcome with this beads of rice configuration this has. As you can see, this is where you get more of your polish pop, so you do have the polish on your beads in a typical configuration, and then on the exterior you do have more brushing, which really makes it a cohesive look for that overall. But this is a true beads of rice, meaning there is individual articulation that we'll check out here shortly, so that really helps it to drape across the wrist. As far as the links themselves, they are nice short end links, so no problem there whatsoever, and again, we'll see that with the articulation here. As far as the links being held in, they are held together with screws, so nice and easy to size that up. If you don't already have one, I will have a quality screwdriver linked down the video description. Encourage you to grab one, keep it on hand, and then do be sure to put some Loctite on that as well, but very easy to adjust those. And then on the back, this one does have quick release spring bars, but that does not carry over to the others. As far as the articulation, as I already alluded to, excellent articulation, excellent drape for this. There is both lateral and horizontal articulation, so this really just seamlessly contours to the wrist, no problems there. It folds almost flat to the case back. It does touch the case back, but it has with those quick release spring bars, it pops out a little bit, but no impact whatsoever on wear unless you had a very small wrist, which I don't think you'd actually have enough links to take out to get too much smaller than my 6.5 inch wrist anyways. As far as the clasp on this is one of the areas where this really shines. So this has a nice clasp incorporation. We've seen others of this similar style. So you have on the exterior, you have principally brushing as well as polishing, a little accent. You have their brand name. You just have double pushers. As you open that up, really excellently done machine turned bridge for this. So this isn't just a milled bridge. It is nicely decorated as well. But the real claim to fame here is like we've seen Christopher Ward and Zelos and others. You can see that adjust there. If you pull that lever, you can actually slide this all the way out, so you do get toolless micro adjust with that, which is always very welcome. That is a ratcheting style, so you can actually push that all the way back in there with this on wrist as well. So you can't adjust it outwards on wrist, but you can push it back in on wrist, which is excellent. Shifting over to the strap, this leather strap on this particular one does carry over with the taper. It does also have, as we already saw earlier, a tropic strap that is available. The leather is going to be more of like a solid slab kind of leather, and it does have a little bit of accent at the lugs with that stitching up there as well. These, unfortunately, do not have quick release spring bars on the back of either version, but they do feature somewhat customized as far as the buckles. You do have nice little accent. Those are going to be brushed for the buckles on these. All right, so now that we have all that out of the way, we should have a better feel for what this particular model is like, but let's go ahead and bring in some comps to get a better feel, and I have each of these brought in for a reason. First, let's go ahead and check out this green next to the Henry Archer Aqua. And you can see this coral green. They really have a different presentation. In fact, I thought these were going to be more similar than they are. This one really takes on more of a pastel effect on the aqua, whereas this takes on more of that lime green kind of aesthetic to it. And this does shift a lot, though both of them do shift a lot, but I find this one really shifts a lot in terms of color range. Sometimes it's a little more of like a grass green, other times it's a little more of that kind of neon metallic, but that gives you an idea there as far as the sizing next to this 40mm Henry Archer. Next up, let's go ahead and bring over the other because I want to check out. Here is next to a salmon. So this brass just gives you an idea as far as this airs a little more on the like coppery brass colored side next to this Zelos Comet. And this is a more traditional salmon coloration. So that gives you an idea here. That brings out a little more of like the orange peach coloration for that. In this one, I believe is 39mm if I recall correctly. That gives you an idea there as far as sizing. But of course with fixed bezel where it's a little larger. And then next up, I just want to bring this in. This is a Tusino. This is their shellback, and specifically this is the gloss enamel, or the enamel black dial. So that gives you an idea of the gloss black as to how that might present with picking up that overall aesthetic there. Just to give you an idea, and again, this is around 40mm as far as for size comparison as well. Alright, so now you should have a much better feel for what this model is actually like to live with, as well as some of the in general attributes of it. But let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, some critiques, as well as a summary. First, I personally think that these colors are absolutely lovely. No matter which one you go with, I'm really partial to this, and I should have mentioned at the outset, while they did loan these ones to the channel, this green one is actually mine to keep because that was my personal favorite of all the options available. But I think no matter which one that you go with, I think they are all very attractive, great looking watches across the lineup, and I like the finishing as well. As far as the contrast, as we already looked at, this has excellent contrast across the lineup. No matter which dial version you go with, even the black one where it changes that up to the gilt as opposed to all the other ones that have the black hardware for that, with each of these, you're going to have excellent pop, excellent contrast, great legibility. The crystal distortion, and I'll come back to this one, but as I already mentioned, I personally think that that's a really cool look. I like that distortive effect that you get right out on the edge with that box edge crystal, and I just think it's nicely done. It's a very subtle dome to the crystal itself, but then that box edge, really cool touch there. And then comfort. You know, I have most worn this green one and worn it on this bracelet. The comfort's excellent. It really just drapes nicely. It doesn't weigh you down. I think it actually wears its just over 140 grams very well. I put this a little closer, like 125, 130 as far as wrist feel, just because it's so balanced. It tapers and it is so nicely articulated on the wrist across the board. Excellent comfort, no complaints there. And then finally, one of the big areas that they really hype up for all of this, especially at the price point, because these are coming in at $499. You get the total package, that's the bracelet, that's the leather strap, the Tropics, everything we saw in the unboxing portion. But with all of that, they actually also really focus on quality control. In fact, you get 3 rounds of quality control, plus, as I mentioned, the regulation with these as well. So you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck, and I think it shows in the overall fit and finish across the watch. So that's definitely something very nice. But what about the critiques? There's really only a few minor nitpick kind of items that I have here. The first, and actually first 2 pieces, are both related to the lume. You'll notice on these, and it might be hard to pick up on camera, but across lighting, you can see just a slight color variation, particularly during the daytime, between the handset as well as the markers. When you shine a UV light on it, you do see it there as well, even though it doesn't show in the lume footage. But with this, you know that there's definitely just a more pure whiteness to the hands than there are to the markers. And again, it's something that's pretty subtle, but that's something oftentimes those are sourced by different manufacturers, and it's not uncommon for that to happen. However, it's something that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me, so I don't think that's the best. As far as the pips, you can see on both of these versions, you get just a little bit of ghosting for that. It looks a little bit almost dirty for that, the way that it goes in the middle. And again, not uncommon for it, and these are nitpicky items, but that is something that I noticed, not my favorite attribute. I probably would have preferred if they just stuck with black enamel all the way around and just, for me, lose the function of having the lume pip at night, I think, for the better aesthetic. And then the legibility, as I already mentioned, we would come back to this. The legibility here, as you can see, when you move around with the hashes on the exterior, you do kind of lose the chaptering to that distortion into that box edge. I don't functionally find it to have any real impact, but it is something that as you move around on the wrist, that you can kind of lose that. For me, I like that aesthetic. I think it's kind of fun the way that it has that playfulness, but I know that's not going to be for everybody, so I did want to point that out. And then finally, the only other little nitpick is the lack of quick release spring bars. It's especially nice that they include all these different straps, and they do include the tool as we saw. However, I would have liked to have seen on the leather as well as the Tropic to have that quick release spring bar like the Bracelet does. That would have made it a lot easier to switch these around. So very minor items overall. So where does that leave us? This is one that really wasn't on my radar at all until they reached out, and I'm glad that they did, because this to me is pretty much a sleeper. It's one that I hadn't really heard of, but I'm quite impressed with this, and I've really enjoyed the heck out of wearing, like I said, most of the time this green version. But these are really both great looking Dow offerings that come at a very reasonable price for what you're getting overall. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If you did like it, as always, do tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, give that subscribe button a smash. And then finally, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Is this one you had checked out before? If not, what do you think of the overall design? Do you like the aesthetic of it? Which color is your favorite? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.